Hey there, my fellow author. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, an old soul kind of writer living my dream as a full-time author and authorpreneur. But I didn't start out living a confident, creative lifestyle. I struggled with the fears and the mental and emotional barriers that so often plague writers at all stages of their author career. But the truth is that with the right knowledge, tools, and training, you can overcome those barriers. I'm here to teach you how I've developed a lifestyle that's allowed me to publish 19 books and counting. Each week, as you tune into the Confident Fiction Author podcast, you'll get clarity on the steps you need to take to advance your writing career. Whether it's developing your ideal writing routine, tackling new skills like dictating your fiction, or overcoming the obstacles life throws your way, this podcast will help you live a more confident, creative lifestyle. Let's get started. Hey there, my friend, and welcome to this week's episode of the Confident Fiction Author podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, and today I'm going to be talking about why doing nothing might be the most productive thing for your fiction writing. Now, before I get into this, let me just share a couple of things that are going on with me and my writing life and my personal life. I've had a lot on my plate this year, as I'm sure you can relate to. It's just, you feel like you're in busy seasons and then you're getting out of the busy season and then you're like, nope, here's another busy season. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in next week's episode. But that's just kind of how this year has been for me. I've not had a lot of breathing space, especially since I'm still on the caregiving team for my cousin who been going through her cancer journey. And just this past week, she had an issue. And so it's taken a couple of extra trips into her doctor. And that's been on me. So it's just that between that and the car accident. So I did share that my mom and I were in a car accident a couple of months ago. We also have a really big personal project that we're working on together and a really big new creative project that we're working on, actually projects. And I'm not going to talk about them just yet, but hopefully I'll get to talk about that in upcoming episodes. So I've got that going, and I've just had this burning desire to really get more deeply back into my own fiction writing and up my word count and really get some books written that have been on my heart and been on my mind for several years. So got a lot of this stuff going on. And talk about the 4-burner stove analogy. I've mentioned that a few times in older podcast episodes, but it's like life. You have 4 burners on the stove, right? And I talk about, you can have these projects going and all, but you really want to limit to what will fit on your stove. And at that point, you've got to think, does this need to go in the oven? Does this need to go in the fridge for a while? Do I need to take this off the stove? And also defining what needs to be on the back burner or the front burner. So I was talking about some of these things with my mom last night in our hot tub. I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but we got, hold the phone here, we got an inflatable hot tub. Y'all, this is legit. We thought this is going to be like a blow-up kiddie pool. Like, what's the point? We're really big hot tub people. Like, we will go stay at a hotel specifically if they have a working hot tub. Like, that's a deciding factor for us. So just off on the rabbit trail there. If you've ever thought about getting an inflatable hot tub, do check them out. We love ours. So we were in there, and I was talking to her about some of the things that I have going, and she really helped me think through, all the stuff in life and kind of what's overwhelming me. And I had a thought yesterday of needing to put the podcast on pause for a while because I feel like I just can't get out. I just can't pull out of all of these things that I have going, and I just not really doing all of the things well that I want to do. And she kind of put my own analogy back to me about the stovetops. And also I talk about, it back in a previous episode where, when to quit or when to just, we need to pull back or give up a project. And that came to mind of, it's not always that we need to quit something is maybe we just need to reduce it. And so that's back in episode 18 and 19, and really episode 17 as well. So I really talk about applying the 80-20 rule to your author career and how to know what to quit and when to quit and how to do it. So one of the things with that is not so much quitting, but reducing what you're doing and look at if you can do that. And so she just asked me, well, could you do one podcast episode a month or maybe every other week? And I was like, bingo, that sounds a lot better than just having to put the podcast on pause for a while. I was like, I can do that. I can do a couple of episodes a month. So I wanted to let you know, as one of my loyal listeners, that the Confident Fiction Author podcast is continuing, but I am going to reduce my obligation to it to every other week. So that's coming, and I just wanted to give you that heads up that it will now be going to a bi-weekly, and hopefully I'll be able to return to weekly in the future, but that's just the season that I'm in, and so I want to just be able to do all the things that I want to do well, and rather than trying to juggle too many things and full-on projects with that. So wanted to give you that heads up, and also just let that be an encouragement if there's something in your author life that you need to not necessarily quit, but maybe just reduce so that it's not so overwhelming in this season that you're in. Okay, so let's get into the content with today's podcast about why doing nothing might be the most productive thing for your writing. And I think, isn't it funny how some of the best ideas that we have come when you're not trying to come up with them, right? So when you're in the shower or you're doing dishes and that story idea or the perfect solution to the plot problem that you were having, boom, it is just there. It's there just out of the blue. You weren't sitting there trying to force it. You weren't sitting at your computer or in your writing session with dictating on your phone, and you were like trying to really get this worked out. It just comes to you when you're not doing anything, or you're just kind of doing mindless chores and things. So that's what I want to talk about today, is how stepping away from your story, and I mean really stepping away from it, isn't just good for your brain. It might be essential for your best creative breakthroughs. So I have my own examples I want to share with you, and just some practical tips that you can take to really give yourself that space and that time to come up with your best creative ideas. So let's get into it. All right, let's talk about the myth of constant hustle. There is this common mindset among us fiction writers that we need to be writing more and thinking harder and always doing something to stay productive. And as long as we're doing that, we are being real authors and we're going to be confident in what we're doing. And I do agree with that to an extent. I love what, I think it was Charles Dickens that talked about. It might have been Mark Twain. I get my classic authors mixed up. But one of them said something like, yes, I only write when I'm inspired, and I'm inspired every morning at 9 a.m. when I sit down at my desk. And I'm like, that is true. We want to show up to our fiction writing seriously. We want to do it like it's a job almost. And that is always that balance, right? Of, do we treat it like a job versus, we're artists, we're creatives. And so I do commend being disciplined and showing up for your writing. And that's why I teach my 5-minute fiction habit. So 5-minute fiction writing habit, where you are touching your story every day and you're really making that progress, and you're not letting those blocks that are really not there. Like, you need to just get in there and get a little bit of fiction writing done. You can do it, all that kind of thing. I do agree with that to an extent. I also know that this can lead to burnout or creative block if you're really trying to force something that's not there, and just doing it for the sake of productivity and hustle, keeping up with the next author, and trying to force something that really what you may need to look at is taking a step back. Because if you keep trying to force that and it just hasn't percolated long enough. It just hasn't stewed long enough, your story idea, and maybe you need to give it time rather than continuing to try to force your writing, and that create blocks or burnout. And that's something I know a lot of authors are facing now. Even this year, I see so many authors talking about just hitting that point. They've hustled for years, decades even, and they're hitting that point of burnout with their fiction writing. So if you're there, do go back and listen to those episodes that I did, 17, 18, and 19, about quitting or paring down what you're doing with your fiction writing. But just know, if you're not there, I want to keep you from getting there, and remembering that constant hustle, that's not what we're looking for. We are looking for confidence, we are looking for discipline, but not the hustle that will lead to burnout. So when ideas really show up for me are those times when I'm doing nothing. And I'm going to talk about thinking time versus relaxation time. But a few examples of this are like shower thoughts. I have been so tempted to take my phone to the shower. I have, a waterproof cover that I can put on it and all that I use for out at the lake and at the ocean. But I have resisted that. And same thing with the hot tub. Like, I've been so tempted to take my phone out there and put the waterproof case on it and listen to music or podcasts and all. And I'm like, no, those times are golden. Those are times of when I am able to just really think through what is going on in my life, or specifically with my fiction writing. How do I solve that issue with that character? Or how do I end that scene? Or how do I wrap up this book and this series? That's where I'm at now with my Doc Beck Westerns, where I'm in the last book of this 12-book series, and I want to do it right. I want all of these elements in that final scene, and what does that look like? So that's times that when I'm in the shower, it's just distraction free, keep my phone away, and really allow those thoughts to percolate. The other thing is, while driving, I've had some of my best story ideas come to me when I'm just letting my imagination play. And I think just being outside is very helpful for my creativity. A lot of my long drives are in Oklahoma, so I'm driving to our different places in our Choctaw lands, and I'm very inspired, honestly, whenever I'm in those spots. Like, when I'm just driving through, that's when I'll have some of my best story ideas. No music, no podcast, no audiobooks. I am just enjoying the scenery around me and soaking in the terrain and letting it be my inspiration. So driving time, cooking, I love thinking whenever I'm cooking, because I'm very engaged, in what I'm doing with cooking. I have to be, because I'm not a great cook and I want to make sure I do it right. But it's also an opportunity for me to think, and it's a very sensory experience, right? You've got sound, you've got smells, you've got, action, all of these things going on. So it can be a great sensory experience. And that's often a great time for me to think about stories and think about the real lives of my characters. And a couple of other examples of when ideas really show up is out on a walk or doing chores like folding the laundry. It can also be in times of like going in for a massage. And I remember one time, that is one of my other things that I enjoy every once in a while, going in for just an hour-long massage of being able to relax, but it is also thinking time, because I'm totally disconnected from phone and computer and work, and just being able to get into just letting my brain relax. And that's when a lot of good ideas will come as well. And I'll have to, at the end, quickly grab my phone and dictate off a few notes if something came to me. But let me talk about thinking time versus relaxation time, because massage does fall more into like the relaxation time and like the hot tub and those types of thing. But so there is a difference between thinking time and relaxation time, and sometimes those will overlap, but it is good to keep those separate when you can, because for me, relaxation is restoring my body and my mind and just kind of letting my emotions settle and like, okay, where were we, Lord? What is going on here and what's going on? And not even really thinking about what's going on, but I just really, yeah, it is too. It's part of what's going on with my mind, what's going on with my body and my emotions, and how do I relax in that and just enjoy, his presence and peace and connecting with who I am at a soul level. So relaxation can be a part of that. It's a bit different from thinking time in that thinking time can be intentional, just like relaxation, because you are really creating that space for reflection and strategy and fresh ideas to come to you. If you're constantly thinking about the next thing, the hustle, the to-do list, the emails piling up, and you're busy, you're going through all of those things, you really don't have time to just sit and think. And I heard someone, an entrepreneur several years ago, where he was talking about you want to have 1 hour a day of intentional thinking. So you are just sitting there for 1 hour a day thinking. And that has stuck with me. And I'm like, wow, who just sits for 1 hour a day thinking? And I think it's important to do reading also for fueling ideas and creativity. And I think you can do your thinking during, like I said, shower time and dishes and all. But wow, imagine just sitting for an entire hour and thinking about all of these things you consume. Like if you're listening to a podcast while you're doing dishes, you're thinking about that podcast and you're consuming that education, but you're not actually thinking through how does this apply to me all the time. So hopefully you are with my podcast. I try to make it very directly for you and how you can apply it right now to your writing life, but it is still, you're thinking about what's being said and you're trying to process that. But what if you had time in the day to just sit down and think about that podcast episode that you listened to or that book that you read about how to craft compelling characters, and you really sat down, not even in your writing session. So sometimes we take that and we're like, okay, I'm going to apply it. I'm going to take action on it. And we sit down and we try to force it into our fiction. Here we just learned this. Now I'm going to apply it to my fiction writing. And you may need time to just sit down and think about it. Think about how does this apply to this character or to this plot or this book that I'm reading? So allowing yourself that thinking time is just incredibly useful for us as fiction writers. We can have plot breakthroughs and character insights, or just that big picture clarity that often comes when we're not forcing those ideas. An example of this is book 6 in my Choctaw Tribune series that I have had on my mind since I started this series in 2015, but very specifically since 2021, I have been thinking about this book and collecting notes for it, and I finally just kind of gave up. Not gave up on the book, but I was like, I'll get to it when I get to it, and I guess I just need to let it percolate some more and just kind of stew and think about it, and that's exactly what I needed to do. I did need to give it time, but then I did need to sit down and think about it. And so I specifically and intentionally just stopped myself one morning during my morning routine. And I was like, you know what? I am going to think about this book. I'm really going to think about the series, think about what has stopped me from writing this book. And I finally came to the conclusion of I was overcomplicating it. I was wanting to put an entire 10 years worth, a decade worth of Choctaw history and multiple controversial topics and themes and all of this stuff, and also try to mesh that with my characters in the series, my established story world, and I wanted to just force all of this into one novel. And I finally, because I sat down and just thought about it, I was able to acknowledge that I was overcomplicating this story. I needed to make it effortless. I needed to make it easy. I needed to make it fun. And once I started allowing myself to think in that direction, the story came together. And I'm so excited. It's the next book that I'll be writing. I'm currently working on the outline for it. So That is a book that has been on my mind and my heart for years. And really, it did take some time and it did take some other factors during those years for me to come up with this, what ultimately is going to be the plot. But it wouldn't have all come together and I wouldn't have made some of those hard decisions about the things that I'm going to leave out. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't just sat down and thought about it. Why we fiction authors need this thinking time so much is, storytelling and writing a novel, it's a mental marathon, not a sprint. So very few authors write a book in a day. I know some authors who have attempted it and some who have succeeded, but generally you're going to be in a novel for months or even years. And so we need that thinking time throughout this marathon to be able to make sure that we're creating that plot and creating the characters that we want to do. And when you have that space and that time for subconscious processing, it allows you to keep moving forward with your story, even when you hit that messy middle, right? We all have experienced that. We start strong and we're really looking forward to the climax, but somewhere in between there, we hit that middle and it just really, we start feeling bogged down. And I think that is the time when we may start feeling some blocks and we're like, I really don't want to write today because I'm in this muddy middle. And maybe you need to spend more time thinking through that muddy middle and really thinking about how can this be engaging? What do I need to set things up for the climax and the conclusion? So maybe that muddy middle isn't so much about pulling ourselves up by the bootstrap and I'm going to plod my way through this and get it done. Maybe you need to slow down during that time and spend more of your writing session in thinking rather than getting words down. You still want to get words down, but allow yourself that thinking time in there as well. I think about with dictation, which you probably know, I dictate all of my fiction. I've done that for my past several books. And something that a lot of authors, especially when they're just getting started with dictation, is they feel that pressure of once they activate their dictation function, they need to speak nonstop and just speak as fast as they can and get words on the page because after all, they are dictating and that's the point. I want to go faster and I'm not allowed to stop and think. And that is something, if you've faced that with dictation, I just want to say, give yourself permission to stop your dictation function and just sit there and think. Think about where the scene is. Think about the next sentences that you want to write. Think about the setting. Just give yourself that time and that permission to stop and think while you're doing your dictation. You do not need to speak constantly once you start. So I think that's really important if you are dictating or if you've attempted to do dictation is just remember, you can take your time, stop, and think through your story. Okay, so let's talk about how to build thinking time into your writing life. So I know I talked about, hey, one hour a day, that's what this billionaire entrepreneur does. That's great. That doesn't really work for me as, you may be thinking, as a working mom or a husband supporting my family or whatever your position is. It's like, I can't sit down for 1 hour a day and think. So here's some just practical tips that you can do to build thinking time into your writing life. One of them is to schedule short breaks without media. So times when you're not on your phone, you're not watching TV, you are just having a break without media. And for me, and I think this is something with a lot of us, when we first wake up in the morning, we don't necessarily have to bounce right out of bed and get at it. Some of us do, and that's fantastic. But for a lot, you're kind of laying there for a few minutes, right? Getting the sleep out of your eyes. And what is it that we typically do? And this may be something you do. This is something that I've done and I still do occasionally. But a lot of times I will reach for my phone and I will spend that first 10 or 15 minutes of the day while I'm getting the sleep out of my eyes, just mindlessly scrolling through social media or checking my emails. And that is something that I really broke that habit. Like I said, I still slip into it, but I broke that habit. And I now spend the 10 or 15 minutes, even getting the sleep out of my eyes, or sometimes I'm just kind of waking up. I will use that as my thinking time. That will be that uninterrupted, very quiet time of the day that I can just think. I can think about my story. I can visualize my day. I am just in that mode of thinking rather than if you're on your phone scrolling through social media, you're not thinking. It is beneficial, and don't want to say that. It can be, it's nice and it's addicting, right? Like we want to, we would rather just be looking at our phones while we're kind of in that still relaxed state and we're waking up. But what if you use that 10 or 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is, to just lay there and not touch your phone and just use that as a short break to do some thinking time. The other thing you can do is take walks without podcasts. I love listening to my podcast. I have a podcast. I love listening to craft podcast on fiction writing and business and lifestyle and all of those things. But what if you had some times where you weren't listening to a podcast? So maybe when you go out and take that walk or walking the dog, maybe you're not listening to an audiobook or a podcast and you're using that as your thinking time. Another thing you can do is have a thinking place. So maybe it's a porch or a park bench or a couch. And again, those are times that you're not sitting there on your phone scrolling through social media. So you may have like a thinking place already, you're just not utilizing it in that way. So maybe it is, like I said, sitting on your porch or just on your couch in the living room. I'll tell my mom sometimes, it's like, if you see me just staring off into space, I'm okay, don't worry about it. I'm just thinking. I don't have my phone, I'm not watching the TV, I'm not reading a book, I'm just sitting there staring into space and that's my thinking time. And it's nice to do it alone, like if you don't have distractions or that temptation for conversation. But even at that, even if someone, your family and you're in the living room and they're watching TV, you can just kind of disengage from that and put your earbuds in and maybe just listen to some white noise and just use that as your thinking time. Not ignoring your family in any way, but like I said, if they're watching TV or they're playing games or reading books or whatnot on their phones, you can use that as your thinking time as well. And I'll just wrap up with this, I say 1 hour a day. If that just sounds like impossible, I don't get 1 hour of just thinking time a day, honestly. I'll usually get about 30 minutes. So like I said, that morning and then maybe sometime in the afternoon or the evening. So if 1 solid hour a day or even broken up throughout the day sounds impossible, aim for 1 hour a week. So is there a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning or, one day in the evening, a Wednesday night that you could get in that hour, you could get in that walk, or you could go sit at the park bench, or you can just get somewhere sometime in your schedule to just sit 1 day a week for an hour and just think about your story, think about your fiction, what it is that, and even just your fiction lifestyle, like what do you want this to look like as a fiction author? So the main thing is I want you to look at making this a guilt-free part of your process because thinking is working. So if you're just sitting and thinking about your story, you may feel you're being unproductive and you feel a bit guilty that you're just sitting here and thinking instead of writing. Just make that a guilt-free part of your process in that you are giving yourself permission to do it. Okay, so I just want to wrap up here with saying that stopping to think is not delaying your story. It's not being unproductive. It's a part of your fiction writing strategy. Because sometimes the best way to move your story forward is to walk away from it for a little while and just think about it. And so that's what I want to invite you to do this week. Go ahead and schedule some time to just think, whether that's first thing in the morning, that you can just leave your phone on the nightstand and spend that time thinking instead. Or if you can go out for an hour-long walk and use that time for thinking, I want you to think about when you can put that into your schedule And then I would love to hear how it goes for you. Reply to one of my emails or shoot me an email at hello@fictioncourses.com. I'm also over at Substack now, so you can find me at fictioncourses.substack.com. I would love for you to subscribe for free to my Substack there. I send out the Confident Fiction Author podcast on it, and I also include transcripts. So if you would rather scan through the podcast audio, scan through the podcast text, you're welcome to do that, and also be able to pull out the key points and highlights after you listen to an episode. So all of that is over at fictioncourses.substack.com, and drop a comment on the podcast episode and let me know how you are scheduling some time to just think about your fiction writing and what kind of creative breakthroughs you are experiencing from that. That's it for this week, my friend. I'll see you in the next episode of the Confident Fiction Author podcast. Take care.